for this weekend's Capitol Report. Pat McGuigan is here, and we're talking about all of the bills that have been introduced or that will be introduced over the next legislative session. There were over 2,400 of those introduced into the Oklahoma House and Senate. So talk about some of those. Any surprises there?
Yeah, there were some surprises, and I think the most interesting thing, the Oklahoman had an editorial, and I think they made a good point earlier this week by pointing out that you have the party of limited government and small government having a total of 200 more bills introduced in this session than 2 years ago, and a whole lot more than last year. That's by the way, that's a normal pattern. Odd year you have more bills because it's the start of the legislative cycle. So the point is, a lot of legislation introduced, and Republicans and Democrats both get credit for that, but it's the party of limited government throwing more bills out than ever. And there are some interesting particulars.
Okay, let's talk about one. One of them, a lawmaker proposed a bill that would redefine rape. Talk about what that looks like.
You know, in some regards, that particular proposal might be a reflection of the changing nature of the legislature. Senator A.J. Griffin, who was elected in a special election originally last year and is now in a full-fledged term of her own, has worked in the past with children, young people who have been sexually abused, and she is a very caring person. I think there's some problems with her proposal, but she's obviously approaching it very honestly. What her bill would do, the way it would redefine rape, is that a church worker having a relationship with a church member under the age of 20, that would create an instance of statutory rape.
So even if the person wasn't on staff, or if or only if they're
on
staff?
Volunteer or a staff member of a church,
interesting.
it bans sexual relationships. Now, it kind of shows where we are culturally that we're even talking about such things, but on the other hand, it's a concern. The ACLU and others have pointed out that when you're talking about, yes, the law can make distinctions, 17, 18 and below, but when you're talking about an adult, even if it's a young adult, and those kinds of regulations, a church can have a policy like that, but to make it state law might be problematic.
Yeah, I could see where that would be an issue. Another one, medical marijuana bill was proposed in our state. Talk about that one a little bit.
Yeah, and I'll quickly touch on one other so we can move on, but on the medical marijuana, Senator Connie Johnson from the east side of Oklahoma City actually has two bills. One would substantially decriminalize the use of small amounts of marijuana. The other one would explicitly allow the use of medical marijuana, kind of patterned on California and others that are headed in this direction, Colorado, a neighboring state. And so that's a proposal she's pushed for a long time. She's been tireless on it. She does have some libertarian support for that idea. But I think it's going to have tough sledding. Okay.
All right, let's get on to the, President Obama was inaugurated this week, and a lot of people are talking about his speech, his inauguration speech. Talk about what your feelings were.
Yeah, well, I'm one of the ones talking about his speech. Some conservatives might think this is an excess of charity on my part. I'm pretty critical of the speech, and yet it was interesting. I think he was attempting to reconcile his agenda to grow government with American traditions of limited government. I think that's a hard sell. And while the speech did not have Kennedy-esque soaring rhetoric, at least rhetorically, he was trying to reach out to the conservatives and the Republicans. The problem is, what I saw was a guy that talks about transforming government when I believe the majority of people in Oklahoma, for example, want to reform government. Transforming makes them uneasy. Security, he's a big advocate of security for individuals, people, versus the American tradition and impulse of freedom and liberty. I could go on. President Obama sees few limits to the reach of government power, and this comes only 30 years after the most popular president of my lifetime, and the most successful, Ronald Reagan, who saw not only practical limits, but principled limits to the reach of government.
All right. Thank you so much,
Let me say one other thing. Charles Krauthammer, who used to be a liberal, was very critical of the president's speech, and he said that the way to translate it is the era of big government is back. And again, that's an explicit rejection of Reagan. We'll see how that plays out with a Republican House.
It'll be an interesting few months and 4 years, that's for sure. All right, thank you so much, Pat. And that is our Capitol Report. Have a great weekend, folks.